Welcome, everybody, to episode 3 of the Functional Firefighter Framework podcast. Nick,
Tony.
thank you all for joining us again for our third episode. I'm really excited about today's episode. This is, I feel, super important topic and overlooked, and that is professional relationships, how we develop them, how we foster them, and work around those that are difficult. There is something that I've noticed, especially through my doctoral studies, is that relationships sometimes, maybe all the time, are more important than the actual data and the information that you're presenting.
Yeah.
So with that being said, we're going to dive right into our guest for today. Super honor and privilege to have you on. Everybody, this is Deputy and Executive Director of the Western Fire Chiefs Association, Chief Bob Horton. Chief, how are you?
Hi, good morning. Doing very well. Thank you very much for having me on the program.
Thank you so much for joining us. This is, as you know, a very important topic that we wanted to dive into, and I couldn't think of anyone else better to have on than yourself. So thank you so much for coming on. For our listeners, can you give us a little bit of your background and what you're currently working on?
Sure. Oh, well, thank you very much. I was born and raised in Las Vegas, Nevada, and I grew up working in the fire service out there. Really enjoyed my time and experience in the field. Spent about 14 years in the field and then promoted into the administration and was an assistant fire chief in Vegas. Did a few years there, got to work on some fun and exciting projects. And then moved out to Oregon to be closer to my family. So I live now in Southern Oregon. I spent 5 years as the fire chief of a rural fire protection district just outside of Medford. Got my first exposure in 2017 to wildfires, and really woke me up to some different challenges that we see, and spent a lot of my time now working in policy. So I retired out of the fire chief position in October of 2022, and now work for the Western Fire Chiefs Association as the deputy executive director. And spent most of my time working on policy issues that impact the fire service, either through topics like you guys are spending a lot of time talking about, recruitment and retention. We work with the 10 Western states and the Western Pacific Islands on key challenges and how can we remove obstacles for state associations, fire departments, and ultimately firefighters to make it a better working environment and a better place to live. So a lot of policy challenges related to that, federal policy, state policy related challenges. So I get to spend the bulk mind share of my time helping fire chiefs and helping the fire service get better. So there's no real better honor for me at this stage of my career.
Wow.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's really cool. Chief, what are the challenges is really kind of forming high quality connections with your people? Like how do you, because that's essentially the only way work's going to get done. How do you form and build relationships and form those high quality connections?
Yeah, I'm a big Walt Disney fan, and folks that know me know that the Walt Disney's history in his company was really built on strong vision, creativity, and supporting people. Walt Disney said you can build, create, design, the best organization, let's call it, in the world, but it takes people to make the dream a reality. And I've always subscribed to that. I tried to do my best that I could to support the workforce. So, but I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge what a difficult challenge it is, particularly in today's environment. And I hope we can be candid. I think that's the purpose of the show, is to really have these candid and challenging conversations about what issues are we facing in the fire service. So if I were to give myself a grade on how well I personally created big connections, and I mean, at like maybe a B minus when we all worked together, and C minus, D plus probably when I was the fire chief. And it was, and not for lack of effort, I think the expectations become different when you're in the top seat versus somewhere else in the chain of command. So I've found over time, making high quality connections very difficult in our environment, almost an impossible target. And I chased it for a long time as an administrator. I knew what it was like in a fire station. I knew how I felt and how others felt. We talked about challenges facing our organization, let's say, around kitchen tables, on apparatus floors. We knew solutions to problems at the ground level. So I knew that as an administrator, if I was going to be successful, I had to listen to that. I didn't have the answers. And I immediately recognized, like, the day when I got promoted to officer and the day I left the rescue, the transporting ambulance in the system we grow up in, for your listeners, is a rescue. When I left that, I knew I lost touch with the rescue, even though I felt like, I had a good sense of it when I was there. Mm. And then when I left the field, even though I was newly minted, as an administrator, I had to acknowledge to myself that you don't know anymore. It's different. The environment that the folks are working in, and it was clearly different. So how do I get those answers, right? I got to connect with the folks in the field and to interface with them. And let me fast forward a little bit from my time as assistant into being a fire chief and moving to a new community and trying to recognize that. Because I had to introduce myself to a lot of new people who didn't know me, know about me, what I was about. And fortunately, the firefighter network is very strong. So the labor union for where I worked in Oregon connects with the labor union where I worked in Southern Nevada, and talk. And fortunately for me, I had a good reputation coming in here, which means firefighters are willing to give you a chance to earn that respect. So, the goal becomes, how do you maintain it? So go around, interface with crews, set expectations. I'm going to talk a lot about expectations, I think, in some of the questions we're going to have today. Establishing expectations and managing expectations, because I think that's going to be a big piece to how relationships either thrive or erode in the challenging social environment that we find ourselves in this unfortunate dichotomy between administration and workforce. So part of why I feel like it's an impossible target is, no matter what I tried to do to connect through various mediums with folks, some folks want to face-to-face. Some don't ever want to see the fire chief. Some want to read it. Some don't have no time, right? You folks will come back from a 4-day and you probably got anywhere from 150 to 200 emails in your inbox. And not as an administrator, just rank and file folks, just that's what's funneling through the system. And everyone who sends that email thinks their email is your highest priority. And it becomes so diluted, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it becomes so diluted, you can't process, and you don't have time to process what's important.
Well, there's definitely emails you look at and you're like, absolutely not. Right.
No way.
And then there's nope. And then there's emails that there's emails still that you get that you're excited about. Like, ooh, what is this? What does this person have to say? So yeah, for sure.
I was always, I never wanted to be the person who ended up just automatically in the trash file because I sent so many emails. So I was just so focused and deliberate about how to try to communicate. And face-to-face, even in a small organization, is really difficult. I mean, you're working on complex problems. And the firefighters will tell me, like, Chief, this is a problem. We have a problem with the ambulance company and we need to fix it. Right. And some of the folks that I work with felt like that was, I got a magic wand. You're the fire chief, you're like Thor, you got the hammer, you just go show up, pound the hammer on the ambulance company and problem solved. You guys know, we all know. I mean, that's just not reality. And where I was at, we had to change laws. We had to change local laws to give the fire service a voice in this ambulance system, because how it's structured in Oregon isn't like it's structured in Nevada. And we had no voice. When you have no voice, you have no power. No power can't fix the problem. So that takes time. It takes relationships like we're talking about on this external folks. Like, where are the relationships that you have that allows your expertise to shine through? Well, right, while you're out doing that kind of work, you're not in a fire station interfacing with crews. You rely on your team, right, to help do that communication. And I might be getting a little bit off track, but I think the point is an administrator's time becomes a ping pong ball about time talking about the challenges with the workforce and what the proposed solutions are, without tipping your cards too hard, because there are people out there looking to sabotage that plan. They don't like that plan, and that's internal and external. So you've got to navigate all of these complex sensitivities about the information you're trying to get the work done, but making sure that you're communicating is a very challenging strategy. So really to summarize is felt like it was very open about my communications plan with the workers. Here's how you can communicate with me best. I enjoy, visiting with firefighters at the fire station. I really do. I don't like showing up unannounced. I didn't like it when the chiefs did it when I was in a fire station. It makes me uncomfortable when I would do it as a fire chief. Oh no, chief, right? They say, oh no, you can come one anytime. You're always welcome. No, I'm not. No, I'm not. Like, you've got the crew ready. You've been planning this drill, right, for weeks, or this is workout time, and you've done the math. Like in your shift, this is the slowest part. The probability of us getting a call in this hour is like the lowest, so we're gonna work out. Chief walks in the door. Hey, fellas, how's it going? Right? Not welcome. I get it. Like I've been in that situation, so I put, I think it's a two-way relationship, right, between the folks that are in your organization, whatever position it was. And this was the expectations I put on them. I need you to come 10%. Right. This was my deal. This was my social contract. From when we worked together and where I was at in Oregon, I said to my supervisors primarily, but it was across the board. It was sort of my version of an open door policy, because I don't know that like sticks. I don't know what that means really in today's environment. So this is what I put out there. I said, I need you to come 10%. You invite me, and I'll go the other 90%, and I will prioritize that 100% of the time to come visit the fire station. If you have a burning issue that you need to know about, I need you to tell me that that's an issue that's bothering you, because I knew that was happening, and it bothered me. Like we're talking about wellness of firefighters. People that worked under my command were stressed out over information they didn't have that I did. And all I needed to do was get it to them in a way that they could digest it. I wasn't afraid to share the information. I made it very clear with my folks is you're going to get full, transparent information from me, except for two conditions. If I can't tell you because it's sensitive for whatever reason, personnel problems, I'm going to tell you I can't tell you. If I don't know the answer, I'm going to tell you I don't know the answer. I'm not going to try to hide behind it. I'm going to be upfront, because that's building trust in communication. Chief says he doesn't know. A lot of folks think you're all knowing when you're the fire chief. I'm not all. I don't know. I've got folks. I empower folks to go out and work and try to solve problems. They're doing things that I'm not really sure what it is, so I'm not always up to speed on what's going on. But I'll find out for you. So the point of it is let's make this a two-way relationship. You only have to come 10%. I will prioritize it 100% of the time. You want me to come for lunch? You want me to come for dinner? You want me to meet for coffee? You want to go to happy hour? Like whatever it is, however you need the information, and I have it. That was real important. That was a priority for me, because if somebody was stressed out and it was impacting their wellness and it was impacting their life over information I had and they didn't get it to them, that was a failure on my part. I can tell you about 8 years as an administrator, I did about a third of my career as an administrator. I can remember 4 times in 8 years where a supervisor or someone on the crew invited me out, say, we're really concerned about X, and we'd like to know more about it. Can you come by next shift? What time works for you? I was really easy. I mean, you could text me, you could put a Post-it note on my computer, you could schedule with my assistant like that. I try to remove every barrier. And that's where I ran into the challenge. Was it felt set up for failure because crews were still mad. We never see the chief. So that's trying to give you a pretty honest and upfront answer in terms of how to build high quality connections. To me, it was about establishing a set of expectations. What is the communication strategy that we have? And how do we both take some ownership in what the outcome of this relationship looks like?
Yeah, for sure. That was kind of leads right into the second question there, because you had touched a couple of things that I feel would enable your employees to thrive at work, whether it be understanding that they would want 45 minutes to work out a day, or if it's introducing them to or allowing them to be part of the problem solving process. Being able to implement policy from the ground up has been shown to be the most effective. So actually hearing their voice and enabling them But what are some of the practices that you feel that you'll introduce to allow your employees to thrive at work?
Your your framing is spot on. How and where can the workforce influence the decision making problem? I mean, at the end of the day, that's what we need. We need folks who are engaged, subject matter experts who want to be part of their future, and we have many of them. Most of the organization wants a bright, a thriving future, and so the job of the administrator is not to make the decisions. My opinion. The job of the administrator, the chief administrator, the fire chief, is to be the architect of a strong decision-making environment. Now, what do I mean by that? Right? Do we have a diverse perspective at the table? Are we including stakeholders who are impacted by the decision that's about to be made? Do we create space for everyone who will be impacted by this decision to have the opportunity to weigh in? Because not everybody will. Some folks just don't want to be involved, but that's okay. We're not going to worry about that. We're going to create space, and when they want to, they have opportunity to be there. So we do that. We have committee assignments, or what we call special project task force. I think committees sometimes just linger on with long agendas, and we don't really accomplish a lot of work. So what we would do is outbound. When I was the fire chief, we would outbound this opportunity for something that was a key decision that was going to influence the working environment. Health and wellness is a good example of that. Who wants to be involved? We're asking for a 6-month commitment. You're going to roll up your sleeves and get some information to the group, and you're going to help influence the decision. Now, there were certain things, hiring and promotion decisions, for example. I reserve the right as the fire chief to make final decision on all hiring and promotion decisions. You got to be upfront about that, right? That is about this managing expectations piece, right? I want your input into the decision, but I want you to know up front that I reserve the right to make final decision. Apparatus, that's a decision that you put out in front of the team, that's the folks who are going to write it. You give them the rules. Here's the box that we have to play in. There's procurement rules. There's how much money do we actually have to spend on this type of thing. Go out and design what's optimal for your working environment. I don't care. And if there was something I cared about, like I don't want it to be this, it has to be this color, whatever color of fire apparatus is a huge contentious topic. It wasn't much for me, but that was maybe when we have time, an interesting conversation when I moved to a new environment.
But I don't think, not to cut you off, Chief, but I think that for our listeners, it allows not only for the process to be run more smoothly when it is coming from an individual on the floor that's actually using the product or living that life firsthand and affecting a policy that's going to directly impact them. But when the personnel on the floor, like you said, that don't want to be involved, but they know that it came from one of their own, it seems to have a higher chance of having to be successful. So that I think is a key piece to be able to understand. If individuals don't necessarily have to be a part of these committees, some people we understand are super busy. They got kids, they're running around, running whatever it be, businesses, or some people just don't really want to be involved. But when it comes from someone, I know especially with us, and Clink, you're one of those people where they go, hey, these guys were on the health and wellness committee, or these people were on the spec committee. The hazmat rig, the guys on hazmat are going to appreciate it more when they're part of that process.
And I remember reading about, and I can't think of which company does it, but the administrators send out a survey to the frontline workers. Like they bypass the frontline supervisors, they get a separate survey, but they want input from the frontline workers into what the problems are and what their solutions are. And they do it quarterly, so they're trying to give everybody a voice, because if everybody has a voice in the decision-making process, that's how you get ownership with your people, right? So then it might have been it was like an industrial process. It was something where there was a huge division. Like there was the laborers who knew the job, then there was corporate America who deals with the dollar and cents and the daily operation stuff, right? And they have no idea what problems like a factory worker deals with, right? But they want the input from the person dealing with the problem, and they do it quarterly, and they increase profits, they increase productivity. all the immeasurables, like sick time use went down, retention went up, but everybody had a voice essentially. The person running the mill could talk to the CEO, right? And that was a huge component, and obviously it was a connection made between that CEO and his workers. So I think what, especially kind of hearing what you do, I mean, like, Chief, if you were as accessible as you say, I would have you over at the station probably once a month, because there's always issues, and then for my guys, like, hey, I want to do this. It's like, well, let's call up the chief. We'll have him come over. You can say your piece, because everybody likes to have, and that's what's weird about us is we're professional problem solvers, right? We do this for a living. Yeah. We work through every. You can add us to anything, and we'll figure out how to get it done. So that's all we do is sit around and solve problems and figure out how to break rules, right?
Dan Pink wrote a good book, Drive, and I don't, if your listeners have read it, they're familiar with the three things that he really talks about that motivates people, and it's purpose, autonomy, and mastery of skill. And as administrators or leaders of the organization, if you can fulfill those three criteria for your workforce, their morale is going to be up, the happiness is going to be up, productivity goes up. Yeah. You don't have to mandate anything. Just remove obstacles and let them roll. Yeah. And when I ran the dispatch center there in Southern Nevada, one of the first things we did was institute the old school suggestion box. Those employees just didn't have a voice, right? It was bogged down somewhere in line level and middle management. They had suggestions that were ignored, and all we did was give them room to communicate with the director, which was me, and say, why can't we? Right? And that was what I put on the management team: is give me a good reason why we can't implement these small changes or even large changes to improve their work environment. And if you couldn't convince me there was something we couldn't do, and the city attorney said we can't, is not an excuse, right? Remove those obstacles, let folks work. Yeah, it's really that easy.
Awesome. So, Chief, when it comes to making an unpopular decision, what is your approach?
So, that's a good question, and it's important. By the time the fire chief's involved in the decision making process broadly, all the easy stuff has already been handled. I should have been handled at some lower level of decision making. And so at the fire chief level, you're dealing with some of the most complex decisions that impact the organization. And large or small, doesn't matter the size of the organization, folks are going to have varying opinions about whatever it is that's the topic. So it's sort of as a fire chief, the advice is don't chase popularity of the decision. You've got to make decisions that are focused around the outcome of interest, which generally has a nexus to your strategic plan. I may talk about here in a minute. So I talked about the fire chief being the decision-making architect, not necessarily the decision maker. And it's creating this right environment where folks who have this interest in the decisions have a chance to say their piece. And in generally, that level of transparency in decision-making and involvement can certainly help reduce the anxiety coming from decisions that are ultimately going to be unpopular. The key is, broad level of communication about it, right? We know this decision, this isn't optimal. This is something we can't reach optimal. And I'll explain why we can't reach optimal. This is it, right? And generally speaking, in an organization where there's trust between all levels of the organization, including the administration, folks can say, I don't like it, but I get it. Like, I understand why we're moving in this direction, or why this decision had to be made. That's a critical piece, right? Is just folks understanding why a decision is what it is. When you don't have good architecture of decisions, or maybe just the administration broadly makes decisions quickly without stakeholder input, people aren't, it's going to increase the unpopularity of what it is that trickles down. Two things that I kind of attribute to this challenge of unpopular decisions. And one is really an erosion of accountability at the supervisor level. in an organization, when you have captains or lieutenants, your line supervisor, who is perhaps the most influential person in an organization, who rallies more around being buddy than boss. And there's some good classes out there on how to get past that. And it's hard in our industry. You grow up around these folks, they're your friends, you hang out on the weekends, and tomorrow you're the boss, and you've got to set the standard and the expectations for your crew. And not all folks who end up in those positions have the courage to do so. And then go up, right? Battalion chief, same thing. And it's hard. Battalion chief's probably got one of the hardest. Captain has one of the most influential. Battalion chief is one of the hardest. Battalion chief straddling an administrative hat and an operations hat. They're around the folks 24 hours a day. Fire chief isn't. Chief in his or her administration is not. So the battalion chief ultimately has to become the communicator of unpopular policy decisions or operational actions or what have you. And it's difficult for them to sustain the blows that they're going to take fire station to fire station. So in my experience, you see a lot of battalion chiefs, sort of their armor gets worn out over time, and it's just easier to say, yeah, that's a stupid decision, and I don't support it. Let's just focus on our own issues. And I don't want to sweeping generalize that everywhere, but I do think that this is a predominant challenge we have in our industry, is this sort of erosion of accountability at various levels of leadership, because we struggle. I philosophically, I think about this, and I don't have time to get into it, but it's this idea of the chain of command and how, where and why, like, is the chain of command important for our industry? And I'm kind of the mindset that it's most important in the command and control environment, right? When you're in danger, like that kind of thing. And I don't know that the modern organization can function on this idea that information has to flow up and down a chain of command. It just erodes. The message now erodes too much when it comes from the fire chief down to the firefighters, through the deputy chief, through the assistant, through the battalion. You get it, right? So that's one piece. The other piece is our folks generally don't understand or appreciate, let me put it that way. They don't appreciate the constraints that the administration is under in terms of decision making. I think you guys framed in your first episode, you were, I think if I remember right, it was sort of talking about this obstacle of progress. And one of them, and you had you sort of listed three different stakeholders. I think it was the union, the workforce, and the administration, and said something about, the fire chiefs worry about budgets. And right, my ear twitched a little bit, and it gave me a smile, because I knew what the intent was. And I would frame it, I would just frame it differently. The fire chief and the administration has constraints by which they have to operate to make decisions. And the budget is one of them. There's only so much money. And when you're dealing with a finite set of money, every decision is a trade-off, is an opportunity cost for something else you otherwise could have spent that money on. And when we look at decisions, we generally look at them myopically under the impact of just that. Why didn't we didn't put X, Y, or Z fanciness on this apparatus, and because of that we're less safe, or whatever the dialogue is. But because we didn't put that on there, we were able to invest in this new wellness equipment across the 21 locations or whatever it was. So we tend to focus in on the singular decision and don't zoom out and realize the totality of all decisions. In addition to fiscal constraints, we've got labor agreements. If you're in a strong union environment and you're working with a collective bargaining system, your union has influence, pure and simple. And they are going to be part of a decision-making process. And it's fair to say that not all thoughts of the rank and file firefighters align with what the leadership of a union thinks. And so there becomes this dissonance between what really ought to be how we manage this going forward. But the chief can't juggle that. The union leadership is elected to represent the position of the body on issues, particularly as it relates to wages, hours, and working conditions, subjects of mandatory bargaining. And in many environments, there are broader contractual or policy issues that the union has to be part of that decision. So you've got You got fiscal constraints on a fire chief. You got labor constraints in many cases. You got regulatory, statutory constraints. The law may or may not allow you to try to do what it is that you're doing. So this is part of being transparent and communicating about decisions. And I think, you said something, Nick, in that first episode about how important it is to be able to communicate that speak. I had a somebody tell me, "Man, you talk like you have management speak." As a rank and file firefighter, so you have management speak. Well, that's the world, right? That's the world that professional administrators have to live in. Is we have to try to navigate all of those constraints and optimize the decision within those constraints. And if we can communicate the process, be transparent about it, even those that don't want to agree that those are the issues, or particularly those that have differing value judgments. I think you are stupid. You should have invested in X instead of Y. Well, that's fair. Like if you've got a normative interest that's different than what the decision landed on by the process that we used, that's okay. I'm perfectly content with you not being happy that we valued some different investment or a decision in a direction that wasn't the one that you would have chosen. I just want you to understand why we landed on where we did.
So on that, Chief, we've heard of this class that you teach on biases and normalization of deviance. Heard it's an awesome class. I'll definitely reach out to see when the next time you'll be teaching it. But can you explain how they correlate and how they affect relationships and drive decision making?
Yeah. So the particular class is on sort of unconscious bias, and it's these influences in our minds that impact how we choose that we don't necessarily have control over. So it's a little different than what maybe human resources talk about bias. It's about biases that influence our decisions. And so we have we have what's called the availability or recency bias. So we tend as humans to believe the probability or likelihood that we're going to be attacked by a shark is highest when we just watched the news and heard that somebody was attacked by a shark. Now, the statistical probability of being attacked by a shark is substantially low, assuming you're going to the ocean, right? You're not getting attacked by a shark in the middle of the city. You're taking your family to the beach. You watch a story about being bit by a shark. In your mind, right? Most people aren't going to go to the data and say, "Oh, what is the actual probability that I could be attacked by a shark?"
Yeah, I know there's sharks everywhere.
No,
right, and that's just one example. We don't have to unpack all of them, but that's like an example of how our decisions or our minds or our thinking about issues are just influenced by these unconscious bias, and it's all of us. Even experts in decision making are influenced by these types of biases. Normalization of deviance, popularized by Admiral Mike Mullen, from NASA, from the NASA space shuttle, talks about it in the context of the Challenger shuttle explosion. And the Challenger shuttle exploded as a result of a failed O-ring, and this failed O-ring was it was brought to the attention. The safety inspectors brought this to the attention of key decision makers about this O-ring. Now we know the outcome. The shuttle exploded, and we know the cause of it. But at the time, when you go back and look at the culture or the environment of that community, it wasn't uncommon for them to sort of look past something as small as a failed O-ring. In fact, other projects were launched with failed O-rings that didn't explode, and thus the risk of that failed O-ring causing a problem was diminished in folks' minds. Fast forward into like our environment where normalization of deviance, we tend to see it is maybe checking out equipment in the morning, checking out your air pack. Right? This is a critical piece of your training. And becoming a professional firefighter is check your air pack every day. Check it twice a day, right? Because when it comes to life and death, one failure of that's going to kill you. But it's not uncommon that folks just take for granted, checked it yesterday, or somebody else, it was fine, or I'm in a hurry because I was moving from station wherever to here, and now I'm behind and I got to go to the muster and what have you. Like, so you can sort of see where in an organizational culture where safety starts to erode and it becomes normalized, It means everyone's just kind of accepting that. We came in, where, SCBAs during overhaul wasn't necessarily normal, right? Should have been, right? I think we knew better. We didn't, right? And that's the normalization of deviance. And so when a culture erodes away, like when I came in as a new fire chief, the first thing I want to do is really an accountability assessment of the organization. Where is our accountability at? Optimal accountability is firefighter to firefighter. Hey, why aren't you wearing SCBA during overhaul? Right, that's optimal. How do we as peers hold each other accountable to the standards we expect as an organization? Eroded, one level is, it's not my job to worry about, so and so. That's the captain's job, and we'll wait for the captain to deal with it. And further, it's the captain says, well, the battalion chief's here, and battalion chief's not saying anything, so I'm not really going to worry about it, and so on and so forth. When we have such erosion, our workforce is at risk, and we increase the risk by more tolerance of those types of behaviors. And that's kind of the idea behind normalization of deviance and why it's so dangerous for an organization to allow that.
And I mean, going back to your kind of those biases that you have, I guess, like especially for us, if we're burnt by our administration, anything our administration does in the future would be, we'd be defiant and put up resistance, right? So I'm sure that's a challenge that you've had, probably stepping into a new position, is maybe the previous guy before you didn't have buy-in and made a bunch of unpopular decisions and didn't communicate. Mm-hmm. And then all the people who worked for you were like, well, we're going to be resistant to the decision-making from administration because administration has burnt us before, right?
Yep. Yeah, well, that's one of the challenges you have as a fire chief, is you're going to sort of inherit the culture of trust or distrust from an organization. And you've got you got a year, maybe, it depends on what kind of critical decisions come up that aren't just sort of expected or routine, like budgeting process, et cetera, to reestablish a new level of trust. But you have to sustain that through consistency. And an organization who has decided that the fire chief is a toad, anything that fire chief does is going to look like a toad, right? And that's a very difficult culture to go into. There are many fire chiefs who have expertise, frankly, in doing that and going in and turning around organizational culture. And it's reestablishing all of these standards of trust that are critical for the organization to thrive. In time, they can restore, right, and restore trust, and it's not because a chief that turns around to a workforce and says, well, you have to care more, right, is missing the point. It's missing the point. You've got to create the environment where firefighters want to thrive, and they will.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Chief, for joining us today. We usually log off with our guests and then do our clip of the day, but if you would like to stay and give us your insight on the clip of the day, that'd be awesome.
Of course, I'd be happy to.
You trust people because you're courageous. That's why. It's the same reason that you're grateful. It's a mark of courage. It's a mark of commitment. It's like you and I, we're going to make an agreement, and you're full of snakes, and so am I. And there's lots of ways this can go sideways. But we're going to put together an agreement. We're going to articulate it out. We're going to try to find something that is of mutual benefit to both of us. We're going to put our hands out and shake, and we're going to try to stick to that. And we're going to risk trusting each other. Right? It's a risk. I don't think that there is any other natural resource than trust. And for trust, you need courage, not naivety.
Okay. So, Chief, what's the first thing that comes to mind?
I tell you, that quote really sums it up great, and a lot about what we talked about today, which is having courage and trust, and how critical, how most important in terms of the relationships, which is the topic we were having here today, is trust in each other. And if there isn't trust, there's no sense in trying to move the organization forward. A leader, a key administrator, needs to slow the pace, forget about what the strategic plan says at this moment. Like, we're going to get back to that. We're going to work on trust. because you can't, it's like walking, like managing an organization is kind of like walking the dog. If the dog doesn't want to go on a walk, then everybody is just at tension the entire time. And it's not enjoyable for the dog. It's not enjoyable for you. It's just completely impractical. When you're in sync, on that walk, you can cover a lot of ground. And the clip talked a lot about courage, and I like its influence on mutual gain. I communicate a lot to do some teaching, but talk to a lot of fire chiefs. And when you're trying to move an initiative or an organization forward, like, you're only going to go as far as your folks are willing to go with you. And sometimes that's not 100% solution. Like, we all know what we think is right. And if you go for the 100% solution, you run the risk of eroding your trust. Maybe you even have it, but eroding trust. And in the strong labor environments, it's, is the union going to fight this issue to a point where it collapses or damages the relationship? And if so, don't push so hard. Right. And I think the key piece, the quote addressed was this mutual gain. How, if a 75% or 60% solution is going to be better, not optimal, but better, but we both get a win out of a 60% solution as an administrator, that's my play. That's what I'm going to do.
Yeah, and I looked at this one. I think this quote goes really well with building or forming those high quality connections, because I'm going to share what's important with me, with you, right? So I'm going to take that risk. And now what you do determines whether or not I trust you. We form an ownership of this plan together, and if I'm going to sell out for you, right? So like, if I share what's important with me to you and you put it down, you didn't only just break my trust, right? You broke everybody's trust who witnessed that, because they saw how you treated that idea that was put out there. And that's the tricky thing about being like a supervisor or a leader, is you're going to have to navigate even ideas that you don't agree with. That idea is special to somebody, right? So like, if somebody gives me an idea or suggestion at a table and I go, well, if I had to listen to you, and I'm pretty sure I don't, right? They're going to be done. You know what I mean? Not only the person that suggested what was important to them, but everybody who witnessed that and everybody who hears about that is going to realize that I'm not somebody you can trust, right? And I think that quote fell perfectly with building relationships and the connections that supervisors need to make with their followers. So,
Yeah. And for me, just thinking about it, that relationship and trust and courage, I think we all should understand that it starts from the moment that you see someone, before there's even a relationship there. And if that's a smile and a wave, or walk over and handshake and introduce yourself, the groundwork starts so early. And it's not when you have to have a conversation or when you need something from someone. I think that if as long as the relationship starts genuine and there's a true teamwork and camaraderie and understanding that we're in this together, whether or not we're bid to the same station or working on the same committee yet, that for me, that the importance is that initial start of the relationship. So awesome. Thank you, Chief, so much for joining us today.
Appreciate
we
you,
really
Chief. Thank
appreciate it. And we'll see you soon.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on the show.
Awesome.